record. It's 7 o'clock. So hello everybody, I am Cheyenne Blevins. I'm the president of the Auburn New Media Club. So today we're honored to have Mr. Walt Woltosz joining us to talk a little about his experience in the filmmaking industry. He is an Auburn alum, so it's really exciting to hear about his story and his transition from engineering to filmmaking. So right now I just want to make sure everyone has their mics muted. We're giving him the utmost respect that he deserves for taking his time to come and talk to us. So he's going to tell us a little bit about his story, his experiences at Auburn and afterwards until now. And then we're going to have a brief Q&A session at the end. So Mary?
Yes, just once again, we are so thankful to have you here, Mr. Woltosz. Mr. Woltosz is a 1969 Auburn Aerospace Engineering alum. He's had a long, successful career from serving in the military, innovating space exploration with NASA, and he even invented the computer software, which allowed Stephen Hawking to speak after being diagnosed with ALS. In recent years, he teamed up with his son to found their production company, Iron Compass, and they just released their first film called Do Not Reply earlier this month. So now I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Woltosz.
Thank you, Mary. How many of you have seen Do Not Reply? Oh, wow, several. Okay, good. Well, I'm going to show you some behind the scenes photography shots. Just you'll appreciate how some of the things that we did were done in the real world. But just to give you a little background, when I got out of high school in 1963, that's right before dirt was invented, I went straight in the Air Force with the idea of getting into their Airman Education and Commissioning program, which I did. It took me 3.5 years to build up 2 full years of college credits, of course, having a full-time job with the Air Force. And I got them to send me to Auburn. So thanks to Uncle Sam, I came here as a staff sergeant, officer candidate. While I was here, it's a long story, but I'll make it very short. The Air Force and the Navy were told by the US Comptroller General to not pay the re-enlistment bonus that we had all been promised, not to pay all of it. Well, 3 of us Auburn undergraduates took them to court, and the long and the short of it was I got out of the Air Force in October of 1968. And finished up the next 3 quarters to finish my bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering, and then stayed on for another 5 quarters and did a master's in aerospace engineering. Left here in 1970 in August. There were no aerospace engineering jobs to be had. My Air Force specialty was in electronics, and I had been in ham radio since I was about 12. My dad was in electronics, so he got me into it at a young age. So I fell back on my electronics experience and went to work for the FAA for a year as a field engineer, installing and commissioning navigation aids called TACAN stations and instrument landing system stations and so on around the Southeast region. Things started opening up when my oldest son was getting ready to start kindergarten, and I found a job in Huntsville and ended up working on the space shuttle with Northrop Services up there. And this was 10 years before the first launch. The first launch was in 81. This was in 71. Ancient history to all of you, isn't it? It's like my parents talking about pre-World War I. I thought, geez, that's so far in the past. And now I realize, to me, it's like yesterday. To you all, it's like, ancient history. But I worked on the shuttle, and I worked on a computer program that was simulating the flight of the shuttle from the launch pad to orbit. And in working on that, accidentally discovered through a change I made in the program that if you rolled the space shuttle upside down and flew it upside down, you could pick up about 8,000 pounds of free payload. That's a very big deal. To pick up, even 800 pounds or 80 pounds of free payload would be a big deal. But 8,000 pounds was phenomenal. And that's why when you see pictures of the shuttle being launched, after it clears the launch tower, it rolls over on its back and flies up upside down. So I worked in that, and I worked in optimization of rocket motor designs using the computer, starting in the days of punch cards. The space shuttle program was 6 boxes of punch cards, which is 12,000 cards, running on a UNIVAC 1108 computer that would fill up oh gosh, it would fill up a room about 40 by 50 feet and didn't have anywhere near the power of my Apple Watch, nowhere near. So these runs would take all night long, run 12, 14 hours. Nowadays, they would run in probably seconds on today's modern computers, even on my laptop that I'm talking on right now. So I worked in that, got sent out to California by Thiokol, the company I was working for at that point in time in 1976, to the Air Force Rocket Propulsion Laboratory at Edwards Air Force Base. They offered me a job there that was a pretty significant jump up from what I was doing at Thiokol. They liked the kind of computer stuff I was doing, so I took that job. Stayed there 3.5 years or so, and then United Technologies offered me 2 more levels up in promotion, and what I thought was a huge salary increase at the time, to move up to the Bay Area in Sunnyvale and work for United Technologies. I got up there and realized that the reason I was getting so much more money was it cost a hell of a lot more to live up there. Just trying to find a house that we could afford. And by that time, my first wife and I, we had 5 kids, so we needed a pretty good sized house. Long and the short was that as I was working for United Technologies, a little bit of a soap opera here, but I'll go ahead and lay it all out. My secretary's mother had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, the same thing that Hawking supposedly had. We never know for sure. And this was 1980. Nobody owned a personal computer then. A few geeks and nerds maybe played with computers a little bit, but the average person couldn't even dream of having a computer in the house. That was just nuts. So I bought one and started trying to develop something that would let her mother communicate, because she had lost the ability to speak and to write. And the long and the short is we didn't really have any success with her. She didn't live long enough for us to learn what it takes to hook a computer up to a person who can only blink their eye or make some other very small motion, maybe just press a button or move a switch. But it got us started. And then that became a business that we had for 30 years. I ended up quitting the aerospace industry, had that business for 30 years. About halfway through that, about 3 years into that is when I met Stephen Hawking, and we worked with him from then all the way on for the rest of his life. But about halfway through that, about 15 years into that business, I really couldn't think of anything new and innovative to do. And so I started looking back at what I did in aerospace, which is simulation and modeling software. But now I had been in healthcare for 15 years. And serendipity, my 2 oldest kids at that time were working for Syntex in Palo Alto, a drug company, later became part of Roche. And I asked my daughter, who was a secretary for a vice president of research, is anybody doing any simulation work there? And she asked all over and finally found one young PhD who was doing some very simple simulation of how drugs are absorbed in the GI tract. And so I met him, and the long and the short was we ended up starting Simulations Plus in 1996. Took it public on the NASDAQ in 1997 in a little $5 million IPO. We thought that was a lot of money. It's not. When you're hiring a bunch of PhDs and buying computers and renting office space and burning through it, trying to develop a product that you can sell, and you still have no income, except for we still had our first company called Words Plus. That was the company for the computers for the disabled. Luckily, that was able to sustain us along with our IPO money until we got going. And so in the long run, we ended up selling Words Plus after 30 years. It's now owned by another Auburn engineer who is our national sales manager before we sold it, Galen Ponder, and he lives up near Jasper. Still a very small company, but the pharmaceutical side took off. Pharmaceutical software took off, and where we started with a $16 million market cap, we're now at about $1.5 billion. It's gone extremely well. This past year or two, it's really taken off well. We supply software and consulting services to the pharmaceutical industry around the world. I've been to Japan over 50 times, for example, been to Europe many, many, many times. And we do now have 4 offices: California, Buffalo, New York, Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, and Paris, France. And we're looking to expand further. It's been a good business. So how does that get me into the movie business? From rocket motors to augmentative communication, Stephen Hawking, to designing new medicines, new drugs. How did I get into movies? Well, my son, Daniel, who's just turned 46 last month, or in August, has a degree in film production. And I had been involved over the years through Words Plus in several movies. There was one called Right to Die, which starred Raquel Welch and Michael Gross. Michael Gross was the father in Family Ties with Meredith Baxter Birney and Michael J. Fox. That's an old show. Some of you might not remember it. That show was actually about an ALS patient. It was a true story, based on the true story of a psychologist in the New York City area in the the mid 1980s, who had ALS and couldn't communicate well, had a very rudimentary communication system that Tufts University had put out. And she was so frustrated, she just wanted to die. So, the movie was called Right to Die. So it's the, physician-assisted suicide theme. And so we were on set. I mean, I was as close as I am to my computer to Raquel Welch. And, when I was a kid, I would have thought that would be a pretty exciting experience. Well, they had her made up to look sick, right? Because she was an ALS patient. So her hair was cropped short and all dusted with flour or something to make it look all gray, and no makeup, or probably makeup to make her look worse. But I was actually with the director there behind this monstrous camera in a corner of a hospital room at a VA hospital in Los Angeles off of Wilshire Boulevard that had been decommissioned years before. So it was really a mess. But one particular floor was the floor that they used, and they dressed it all up. And when you got off the elevator in that floor, you'd swear you were in a working hospital. People running around in nurses' uniforms and doctors, and people, walking with an IV on a rolling stand down the hallway and things like that. So that was the first movie I actually got involved in as a technical consultant on the communication system that this person used. And I had to simulate it on a computer because it didn't exist anymore. I did that movie, and then I got involved with another movie called Hugo Pool, which starred Alyssa Milano, Patrick Dempsey, before he became, what do they call him in Grey's Anatomy? Mr. Dreamy or something like that, Dr. Dreamy or something. He played the ALS patient. And interesting, in that story, which was based on a real life story, the true ALS patient was Robert Downey Sr.'s wife, who got kind of infatuated with their pool cleaner, their swimming pool cleaner. Well, they flipped the story, and they made the pool cleaner Alyssa Milano in the short shorts and halter top and all that. And then Patrick Dempsey was the ALS patient. And then Sean Penn was in the movie. Robert Downey Jr. was in the movie. That's back when Robert Downey Jr. was kind of, he's great now, but he had some problems there for a few years. You never knew what he was smoking or taking there for a while, but it was kind of a crazy movie in a lot of ways. Sean Penn played this truck driver who wore, I think it was blue shoes or something like that all the time. And anyway, I was, again, involved as a technical advisor on that one. Then involved with the first Hawking movie, which was A Brief History of Time. And then later on, I was actually in a movie called Hawking, which was more of a documentary that came out before the Theory of Everything movie. So in the Hawking movie, I was interviewed for about 3 or 4 hours down in the Caltech library in Pasadena. And I think out of the 3 or 4 hours, about 30 seconds of that got on the screen in the movie. But was able to see that at the celebration of Hawking's 60th birthday in Cambridge. They held a physics conference for him. No, I take that back. That was before that. There was a Cambridge Film Festival where they premiered the Hawking movie. And so I was sitting next to Kip Thorne, very famous physicist who's referenced all the time, and got interviewed up on stage by BBC4. They had that as part of the premiere. So it had some really interesting experiences in film, just indirectly, incidental stuff. And then Daniel got his degree in film production and worked on A Man Apart. He worked on, let's see, one of the Mission Impossible movies with Steven Spielberg and, come on, well, the short guy that does his own stunts. I can't remember his name.
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise, thank you. I don't know why I blank on his name. But yeah, so he got to meet them, and Daniel was pretty astute. You know, he knew that Tom Cruise liked Red Bulls. So he was a PA on that job. And he'd only been on it for about 2 weeks, and he always had 2 Red Bulls, one in each pocket, just in case. And so at the end of the shoot one day, when they shot the scene where they had that big tube coming out of the building, you know, where they do building demolition and they throw all the junk down this tube. And then they had the scene where Tom Cruise flies up that thing with the rocket pack. He happened to be on the shoot that day. At the end of the day, Spielberg and Tom Cruise are sitting there in director's chairs. There's an empty chair, and they say, "Hey, Daniel, come on over, smoke a cigar with us." So he's sitting there smoking a cigar. All the other PAs who've been on set for 6 weeks or something are looking at him saying, "What about us? You know, what's going on?" So he's had a lot of fun, worked on a number of things. And then he ended up producing a full-length feature called Santiago with all of his film school buddies for a total cost of $5,000. They actually produced a full-length feature. You can find it on iTunes. And to see what can be done when everybody volunteers and hopes that someday they might either get some fame out of it or recognition, or maybe even a few bucks. They never made any significant money with it, but it was pretty amazing. And in fact, if you watch Do Not Reply, that was the movie that was on TV when they were sitting all together, when Amanda and Mia and the 2 guys are sitting together on the couch watching this movie. That was Santiago. It was their movie. So Daniel gets his degree, and I'm a pilot. I've been flying for 50 years. 50 years last month. I got my license in September 1970. I own a business jet, a Citation Encore. I have a helicopter rating. I'm an airline transport pilot, and flying is my passion, right? So I get a lot of electronic newsletters on aviation. And one February, about 2012, 2012. It's Black History Month, and I see this little article about someone named Bessie Coleman. How many of you know who Bessie Coleman is? 2, okay. Well, 3, okay. Bessie Coleman was the first American to get an international pilot's license. Now, this was right after World War I. Bessie Coleman was a Black woman. Before any white man or white woman or Black man, a Black woman was the first American to get an international pilot's license. And she became one of the top aerobatic performers of her day. No one would teach her how to fly in the United States. She was born in 1892 in Texas, grew up in a little town called Waxahachie, Texas, mostly about 60 miles south of Dallas. And she was picking cotton and doing laundry, and you know, she was a sharecropper's daughter. I think there was 13 kids, and she was number 11 out of the 13. They were poor, you know, they were poor, and it was hand-to-mouth living in the literal sense. Picking cotton in, you know, 95-degree weather out there when she was 9 years old, and then having to be the brains of the family. She was very smart, and they would go when they pick their cotton, you know, they put it in a big, very large sack and took it over to where the cotton was weighed. And then the person, this is a real story that came out of her biography, the person who weighed the cotton would kind of miscalculate a little bit on how to add things up. Well, let's see, you know, it says it's so many pounds, but the bag weighs this and the tearaway is that and so on. And so that comes out to so-and-so. And she said, no, actually that comes out to so-and-so. And he said, oh yeah, you're right, you know. So she had to keep an eye on this white guy who was trying to cheat them, right? And she was smart enough to catch him at his game. So we end up learning about Bessie. She moves up to Chicago to follow two brothers who moved up there pre-World War I. Her two brothers go off to World War I in France. They come back. Luckily, they survived. And she had become a manicurist in Chicago, working in barbershops and doing manicures for Black businessmen, you know, people who would take the time to get a manicure. And she decided to become a manicurist so she could meet important people. Well, her older brother comes back, and he's teasing her one day about French women, because when they went to France, they were treated as equals. There was no separate drinking fountains and separate restaurants and all the other stuff that was going on in that era, you know, in the 1920s, actually late teens and early 1920s. So he was teasing her. French women are great, you know, they could date, they could intermarry. There was no prejudice of any kind over there, at least among the majority of the population. So he says, they can even fly airplanes. I saw one. And she says, that's it. You called it for me, I'm going to be a pilot. So she went around to airports in the Chicago area. Nobody would even let her sit in the airplane. And she went to a friend who was the publisher of the Chicago Defender. It was a Black newspaper, still around today, actually. She said, I want to learn to fly, but nobody will teach me. And he said, well, there might be a way. She says, whatever it is, I'll do it. He says, you're probably going to have to go to France. She says, fine, I'll do that. He says, hold on, you're going to have to learn how to speak French. She says, okay, I'll do it. And she learned to speak French. She saved up her money. She got businessmen to help her and churches to help her. And they sent her over, and she got over there. And the very first week she was there, another student crashed and burned right in front of her, and she saw him burned to death. And her hero was Harriet Tubman. And she really debated, you know, should I stick with this? She hadn't even been in an airplane yet at that point. She was still doing ground school stuff. And so she decides, well, Harriet Tubman had to be brave. I have to be brave too. And one of her nicknames became Brave Bessie. She really was an incredible human being. I would give anything to be able to meet her. She did parachute jumps when she got back to the US and finally started doing stunt flying. And parachute jumping in that day was a little different than today. You got in this open cockpit biplane in the front seat, because after you jump, the person that's still flying the airplane has to be in the back seat so the weight and balance is proper, or otherwise it's not stable, you can't fly it. So you get in the front seat and you wear your harness, but it's just the harness. The parachute is out under the wingtip, right? So you have to get out, walk out the wing to the edge of the wing, sit down, clip your harness onto the parachute, jump off, and then the bag opens and you float down to the ground. I mean, she was called Brave Bessie for good reason, and people would pay as much to watch her do a parachute jump as to watch her do all of her loops and rolls and, you know, aerobatics. So quite a story. And I thought, I'd been flying at that time, flying for over 40 years, and I never heard of her. And I've read so many aviation books and magazines and stuff. I thought, I know who Amelia Earhart is. Bessie had her license before Amelia. I know who Lindbergh is, and so on, and you know, Howard Hughes, the aviator, and so on. So I called up Daniel and I said, we need to start a family LLC to make movies, and we need to make a movie about Bessie Coleman. And so we spent 5 years writing the screenplay, doing the research, traveling. Daniel went to La Croix, it's so hard for me to say that properly, in France. It's right on the coast near Normandy, where the water, you can go out like half a mile and it's still only a foot deep. Well, the beach there was the runway that she used to learn to fly at the Caudron Brothers flying school. And so he went there, he and Yvonne both went there and saw the town. And we went to Fort Worth, where one of the few remaining Jenny JN4 aircraft are still flying, like the one that she flew. There's only about 4 that are still flying. And every 4th Saturday, they fly it down there. There's a pilot who's qualified. He's one of the Red Bull pilots, if you've ever seen the Red Bull air races and aerobatics. So we wrote that, and we ended up creating a pitch book. And this one happens to have Candace McClure on it, who played, what was her name? Lieutenant Duala in the new Battlestar Galactica series, if you remember that. We actually have a new one of these. I don't have one with me that actually has the real picture of Bessie Coleman on it, but there is a picture of Bessie right inside here. I can see if I can hold that up. So Bessie was a fascinating, fascinating woman. She was attractive. She was charming. She was married without anybody ever knowing it. Even her family didn't know that she had gotten married up in Chicago. She didn't live with her husband. Nobody can figure out why she married this guy. He wasn't particularly attractive. He wasn't wealthy. But she married this guy, and they never lived together. And finally, you know, they just went their separate ways. But mysterious. She started to make a movie at one point. She was contracted to star in a movie. And when they wanted her to play the role of a Black woman that was very demeaning, she said, "I'm not doing it. You know, that's not who I am. I'm not going to play this stereotypical figure." And she walked off the set. And it cost her a lot in terms of points with a lot of people, because they had spent all this money and they were shooting. I mean, they were ready to spend a lot of money and make this movie. And so she was very determined. When she did air shows, she absolutely insisted everyone comes in through the same gate. If you want bleachers, so the white folks sit over here and colored folks sit over there, the terminology of the day, that's fine. But everybody's gonna come through the same gate or I don't fly. And she stood her ground on that, and you know, and she got people to come around and do that. And you got to remember, this is in the 1920s. This is Jim Crow area. This is a very dangerous time to be too assertive as a young Black woman like that. I mean, lynchings were going on, and you know, they would lynch white people who were sympathetic to African Americans. So it was dangerous, and yet she stood her ground. She was truly brave Bessie. Well, we wrote that. We tried to get interest in it, and we're still trying to produce it. Well, it turns out to produce a movie like that, when you look at all the costs of all the period costumes and cars and airplanes and the locations, you're looking at about an $80 or $90 million movie. Well, I don't have that kind of money, you know, so we couldn't do it ourselves. And so we've talked with a few folks. We do have one particular production company who says it's perfect for them. And one of the partners in that company is Nnamdi Asogwu, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, who is a former NFL player and happens to be Kerry Washington's husband. So we're hoping that you know, they'll get time enough to take interest in it. They've read the script, they love the script. We've gotten tremendous feedback from the people that have read the script. So one of these days, we're going to see the movie. We hope it'll still be called The Aviatrix, or maybe it'll just be called The Bessie Coleman Story, or Queen Bessie, or Brave Bessie, or something. So that's how I got into it. And that was while I was still full-time CEO of Simulations Plus. Daniel is full-time with our company, Iron Compass Entertainment. And by the way, the Iron Compass is something that Daniel suggested as a theme. And I was so proud of him for coming up with that, because Daniel's not a pilot. But Iron Compass refers to railroad tracks. In the early days of flying, before there were radio stations to help you navigate, the flyers would follow the railroad tracks to go from one town to the next, and then they'd see the name painted on the water tower or on the top of the train terminal to know what town they're at. And so Iron Compass Entertainment went along with the Bessie Coleman era so well. we get to that, and we said, all right, we can't afford to make that. Let's make something we can afford to make, and that's how Do Not Reply started. So Daniel had written a screenplay called No More Lies back when AOL chat rooms were just becoming popular. And he actually met a gal down in Arizona and got engaged and almost got married till he realized the only way he would be able to do that would be to move to Arizona and live in a complex of homes with her parents and all of the kids and their partners. It was like a cult almost. And he says, yeah, maybe not, you know. So he backed out of that relationship. But he started thinking, you know, with these AOL chat rooms, what would happen if people with nefarious purposes started taking advantage of these? And he wrote this screenplay, and he had a profiler, female profiler, police profiler, PhD, that we always pictured Sandra Bullock playing back then. And this was even before the Bessie Coleman thing. This was way back, probably around 2000 or somewhere in there. And then it just kind of got put on the shelf. So when we decided to make our own movie, we said, well, let's take No More Lies and modernize it. And so we basically scrapped it and started from scratch, writing the new story for Do Not Reply. And that took us a couple of years. And then in about November of 2017, we had polished it and polished it and polished it. And, you know, had lots of friends who reviewed it, sent it out to some of the professional screenwriting or script reviewing companies. You know, you can send a script out to these companies, and for, I think it's around $300 to $500, you'll get 3 critical reviews with detailed comments. And I was surprised at how much detail we got and what good suggestions we got. We didn't accept all of them, but we you know, took them to heart and accepted the majority of them and kept polishing it and polishing it. And finally, about November 2017, I said, Daniel, this script is good. We need to start shooting it. We need to start planning. He said, okay, we can shoot in January and February. I said, what are you talking about? It's November. We don't have a cast. We don't have a crew. We don't have a location. You know, all we've got is a script. I said, how are we going to be shooting in 8 weeks? He said, Dad, that's how it's done. Well, sure enough, we did it. We started shooting in mid-January and finished up in 5 weeks later in just past mid-February. We did the auditions. We auditioned over 300 people for the various roles. We had the sound studio. We had met the folks who owned the sound studio where we started, where it had the kitchen and the living room and the dining room and the stairs that end up in midair. But that's all they had, was just that little piece of the set. But it was a place, and they would give us a pretty good price. We do have Tom Gossam, who is an Auburn graduate in our movie. He plays a psychologist. It's a small scene, but I wanted to get an Auburn actor, either Tom Gossam or Michael O'Neill. And both said, well, whoever's available when you're ready for us, you know, we'll come and do it. And it turns out Tom was the one that was available. Do y'all know Tom? Know of Tom? No. In the Heat of the Night was one of the things that he starred in. He's been in a number of things. He played, I believe it was a judge in the Heat of the Night. Tom is about my age. Tom was the first Black football player to graduate from Auburn. He was on the 1972 Amazins team with Pat Sullivan and James Owens. All right, James was the first player, but James didn't graduate. Tom was the first player to actually graduate. And Tom's a good friend. He is a great actor, a great person. He's been on the foundation board. He was actually chair of the foundation board before his 8-year term-limited term expired. And so we were on that together. In fact, I'm reviewing a book that his wife, Joyce Gilligossam, has recently written on leadership, and she asked me to review it the other day, so I'm working on that. But so Tom was in the movie. Of course, Jackson Rathbone plays our bad guy. He was Jasper in the Twilight Saga movies. All the girls go gaga over Jasper. He's a good-looking young guy. And a lot of fun to work with. Great sense of humor, very directable. And you got to remember, Daniel and I were first-time directors. Daniel had done a little bit of kind of practice directing in small stuff, but this was a full-length feature, and we were putting our heart and soul into this. And so, you know, if we didn't do a decent job, there would have been money down the tubes. It probably still was. We probably never recovered the investment, but we learned a lot. I learned to appreciate things like using a fogger. Why do you need a fogger, right? Well, if you look at a scene with and without a fogger, you begin to realize you take a scene without a fogger and it looks very stark and sharp. Every you know, the bookcase behind me, every straight line is very sharp. But if you use a fogger in the room, and you don't fog it up so it looks like, you know, that you're actually in a fog, but you do it just enough to give it that visual quality. Learning about colorizing in post. You know, you look at all the scenes that we edited using Premiere Pro, and you think, wow, these look pretty good. And then you get into colorizing and you start doing subtle changes that change the mood when you're watching the film, depending on the scene. It's just amazing how very small changes in color and sound, of course, is super critical. I have a very strong pet peeve on watching anything where the music drowns out the dialogue, or the dialogue is spoken so softly that I have to go back and keep replaying it 3 times to figure out what did he say? What did he say? Because they didn't say it loud enough to get over the background noise. So we were very careful in our editing to try to make sure. And Elise Luthman, who played Heather, had a very bad habit, in my opinion, of starting a sentence and then ending in a whisper. You know, she would end a sentence in a whisper, and it's like, good grief, you know. So we had to play around with the sound and try to get that going. A lot of the sound effects, the Foley for different things, we played with quite a bit, like the stab wounds and the cuts and so on. You know, what does it really sound like when a knife is being swung through the air? You know, you always hear this zing kind of sound. Is that real? Well, it can be if it's the right kind of blade, and so on. So for me, it was a tremendous learning experience to not only to write together with my son. Everybody know who Jeannie Robinson is, the comedian from Auburn. She's like 6'3", tall woman, probably in her 60s. If you don't know Jeannie Robinson, you have missed some of the best comedy you'll ever see. Do a Google on Jeannie Robinson. She's an Auburn grad and she's proud of it, and she brings Auburn in on almost every one of her routines. But she calls her husband left brain. When left brain did this, or when left brain did that, well, left brain's like me. He's an engineer, I guess. And so, you know, our left brains are where all our calculations and things like that are done. Our right brains are where all the creativity, whether it's artistic or musical or writing, screenwriting, and so on. And so I had been a left brain person pretty well all my life. I played saxophone for 8 years and played some piano and so on, but I was very mechanical. You know, I had to have the sheet music in front of me. I couldn't just sit down and, you know, ad lib, even on a sax after playing for 8 years. So for me to get into a right brain industry like entertainment was a big shift, and a lot of fun. I really had a lot of fun doing it. But to direct, the first thing I did was, for months and months, I read every book I could find on directing actors, and there's one called Directing Actors. I also, on the screenwriting side, y'all familiar with Save the Cat? So if you haven't, if you like to write, if you want to write screenplays, get Save the Cat. There's a couple of different editions of that. Very, very good book on, Save the Cat refers to the fireman going up in the tree and saving the cat who's trapped up in the tree, right? But it's you know, how you write good stories. And so, you know, no matter what part of the media you want to get into, you'll probably want to do some writing at some point. It seems like most actors who are very successful eventually want to direct, and then before you know it, they want to write the story and direct it. It's enlightening to try to write a screenplay. I'm going to stop here. I do want to show you some pictures, if we can get the technology to work again. We practiced a little bit before this all started, just to show you what the sets look like as we were working on this. And let's see, how do I do this? Do you have to make me the host again?
I think you should still be the host.
You are
Okay.
the host, sir.
Okay.
There
Share
should be
screen.
a big green button that says share screen. Yes.
You are screen sharing. Okay. All right. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Let me just scroll through some of this stuff. So this is on the set of Do Not Reply, and my computer is stalling here. Why? I can see you moving, so I know it's not stalling on Zoom. It's just the photos. Well, all I did was swipe sideways and it stalled. Let me get out of photos. If I can, I may have to force quit. Is there something here that's hidden? No, I don't see any hidden message. Let me just stop the share for a second and then bring it back and see if that makes any difference. Oh, come on. This worked so well. Oops, don't want to hit that one. I can't even get to force quit. I can't escape. Well, I don't know what to do here. Stop the share again for a second and see if I can just go into photos. Force quit. All right, I quit photos. I'm out of photos. All right, so now share the screen and go back into photos. All right, okay, can you see that? Okay, so this was a set in Do Not Reply. For those of you that have not seen it, there is a hole in the ground that's like a 1950s bomb shelter. We had to build this set from scratch, and we actually had to raise it about 4 feet off the floor of the sound studio so that we could have this cutout here to serve as a grave later on. So we had a board that went in here and covered it all up, and it just looked like a smooth sand, dirt floor like this. This is our cinematographer, Jan Michael Lasota, fantastic cinematographer, just a lot of fun. He has a way of communicating that's quite unique. He cannot finish a single sentence without the F-bomb being in it at least 2 or 3 times. But to him, it's just so natural that after a while, it just bounces off of you. When you first meet him, it's like, holy moly, this guy's language is incredible. This is Nick Ibarra. Nick was our first AD, and they're just kind of setting up to look at camera angles and so on for a shot that was going to be made. So just looking at how things are going to look through the lens. This is my son, Daniel. We had an ongoing joke on the set about Daniel's always eating something. So every time I caught him eating, I took pictures of him eating. Jan loves to make faces. This is a dummy. This was supposed to be Brad's father. It turns out in the scene that we used that, he's underneath Caitlin Black, who was Annabelle in Heart of Dixie. She played Brad's mother when he was younger in a flashback. Let me get past some of these. This is Nikki Lee. She played Brad's sister, Sadie. My wife, Ginger, and me, executive producers, and Nikki. Daniel and I, the 2 directors. So this kind of gives away one of the scenes. And this is Caitlin Black. Again, she was in Heart of Dixie. That's the dummy that was supposed to be the father. And this was a gal named Dana, who was one of our set decorators. Our sound guy, Johnny Walker, John E. Walker. His assistant, Greg, Jado Kwan, one of our producers, my son, Daniel, and his wife, Yvonne, who played Mia in the movie. This was the stroller when they finally get out at the end of the movie. This was the neighborhood where we shot the final scene where they escape. And this was the house that we used. So spoiler alert for those that haven't seen it yet. Hopefully you won't remember too much of this. This is our star, Amanda Arcuri, who played Chelsea, and our co-star, Carrie Metters, who played Megan. Carrie's in SEAL Team and a number of other things. Amanda was in Degrassi, which was a 4-year-long TV program up in Toronto. Amanda and her mother are from Toronto. And Carrie and her mother are from Houston. This is Jackson Rathbone goofing around at lunchtime. He put on the wig that Amanda was wearing as part of the movie, being silly. And so there's Amanda and Jackson being silly. A lot of the crew during lunchtime would play some kind of a war type video game, and I can't remember which game it was, but they had their little displays here and their separate controllers, and it was some kind of a battle or something. Again, Jackson Rathbone goofing around, putting on the cheerleader uniform and the wig. This is my ex-wife, mother of my 5 kids, and she was a big fan of the Twilight Saga, as well as all my daughters, adult daughters. So much so that all of them got on an airplane and flew up to Washington State, the little town where Twilight Saga was supposed to have taken place. Not a single scene was ever shot in that town. This was just after the shoot one day. We all got together in a restaurant and we were having a little snack and beer and stuff like that. Friends. This was at one of the film festivals. Oops, I've gone too far now. I really wanted to show, let me get back here, how we did the sets, because that was part of the challenge here. So this is the set for the Hole in the Ground being built. These things that look like blocks are actually plastic panels. They're about 4x6 panels that come just straight white plastic. So you got to paint them, you got to decorate them with the cobwebs and things like that. And you can see here how this was built off the floor. And we had this one movable wall, so we could move this wall out and shoot from that direction in, left to right in, when we wanted to be looking toward the red light that we put down here to make it a little spookier. This is the stairway that went up. So this tunnel goes down to the red light and then turns left and comes out facing this, where you can go up the stairs and supposedly come out in the kitchen, which was down the street. Daniel eating again. We had a rat scene. So we had trained rats that were in one of the things. So we had scrambled eggs there. And this is in one of the scenes. The rat goes over and eats the eggs. And the way they get the rat to go where you want is they put a little buzzer underneath the dirt. And the rat goes to the buzzer, and then it discovers there's food over there, so it starts eating the food. And then when you want the rat to go back the other way, you put the buzzer back the other way, and they go the other way. So, and then Brad doesn't like the rat, so there's a rat trap. Bad news for the rat. Daniel eating again. That's Yvonne, got her eating too. Let's see. I was really hoping to see the kitchen part where the hatch is, because that was a big challenge. Daniel eating some more and other things mixed in. Jackson. So this helmet was made out of a hockey goalie helmet with a bunch of these little cameras mounted on it to be a virtual reality filming helmet. It really wasn't. It just looked like one. And when we did shoot some scenes from the helmet's perspective, we put a real GoPro on the front. These were all actually working cameras. We just never used them as cameras. Our stunt coordinator, America Young, fantastic. black belt. She didn't do any of the stunts, but she managed the stunt actors. Okay, so this hatch is in the actual first floor in the first sound studio. There's nothing but concrete under that hatch. But we create the illusion that you're going to go down through that hatch and you're going to come up through it. And we do that by repeating this piece of kitchen above that hole in the ground that was down the street a few hundred yards, a few blocks. So we just duplicated this portion of the kitchen with everything identical. And then you could actually come up that ladder from the hole in the ground and open up this hatch and come out, or you could go down into it and just sequence the scenes appropriately. Okay, so here's where the refrigerator has been rolled out because the hatch was actually under the refrigerator. So that made it, so that Brad, the bad guy, could hide that. So, police come in or whatever, which they never do, they wouldn't find the hatch if the refrigerator was over it. More lunchtime antics. Grave scene again. I think maybe we've seen these. Yep. I think we've seen all these now. I thought I had more. I was really hoping to show the Halloween scene at the warehouse in downtown LA. Do I have that? While I'm doing this, any questions, feel free to jump in because I do want to have some time for questions.
Cheyenne, ready?
Yeah, we can go ahead and start.
Okay. Do you want me to kick off with the?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, so we have a few prepared questions. So my first one is, what is something that your engineering background helped you overcome in the filmmaking process?
Well, one was this thing right here. And I would say, I don't know if it's totally my engineering background. In fact, I had to get over a lot of my engineering background because I would be too nitpicking about some things. I would say, that's not possible. You can't really do that. Well, this is a movie. We can do that. But the escape scene is when Carrie, Megan, the character played by Carrie Metters, kicks right through this wall, which of course has wallboard on both sides. But we first had to frame something strong enough so that because these walls are pretty flimsy, on a set, these are not full strength walls. They're as minimal as you can make them. And so we had to frame this in to give it some strength so that when she kicked through, it would stop at a certain point. Trying to see if we've got another picture of that. I don't see one. So what we ended up doing was covering this up with 4x8 sheets of wallboard. We made about 3 of them, and we scored them on the back side to weaken them. So maybe there's a little engineering there, just figuring out what pattern should I use to score these so that when she kicks through, it will make a realistic looking hole and not come out looking like a preformed square. We ended up still doing some CG at the end because part of one corner was a perfect right-hand angle, and it was pretty obvious, it wouldn't be that way. But one of the things that I got in a big argument about and lost, thank goodness, was the hole in the ground where we had those plastic panels I was telling you about with that made it look like blocks. If I can get back to that. Okay, so we ran out of plastic panels. And so all we had was this bare wall that we could make look like solid concrete. And I said, that's not realistic. If this is made out of rock, then that's what the material is. It wouldn't just suddenly stop. They wouldn't bother putting a veneer over a plain concrete wall. They would just leave it plain concrete. This is ridiculous. We need to get some more of these panels. You can't get any more. They don't have any more. It will take weeks to get them. And so, and I was just so concerned that people would look at this and see that and be critical of it. And of course, it goes right by everybody. Nobody even thinks about it. And so I had to, again, on that one, give up my engineer's perspective on it and think more like a movie maker.
Okay, we have another question. Let's see. What are some problems that you maybe anticipated running into during production, or any unexpected problems and how you moved past those?
Yeah, so I'm right at the right point here, I think, to show this. We had in one of the rooms was a bathroom right here. So this is a bathroom. Well, it's not a bathroom. It's a tub with some walls around it. There's no plumbing to it at all. There's no water going to come out of there or out of here because there's no water source. And yet we had scenes where we needed water. So what we did was we had one scene where Chelsea is brushing her teeth and then rinses and so on, and she's at the sink, which is across from the tub. And we had to CG that in. It sure looks like water. Our VFX guy did a great job because it looks like water, and of course we have the sound effect to go with it and so on. But that was something where I thought we could, get a 5-gallon water supply or something and run a tube down and have actual water flow and have something to collect it underneath. And we tried messing with it, and we really just couldn't get it solved fast enough. This is the sink. And then we actually shot one scene where we took this mirror off and had a hole in the wall, and we shot from the outside looking in as though the two girls are looking at the mirror. So they're looking at the camera, but it looks like they're looking at the mirror from the mirror's perspective. And so, little things like that are challenging, but there's no water hookup to that faucet, but you'll see water coming out of it in the movie.
All right. What is the most valuable lesson that you learned making this movie, something that you will probably take with you on your other movie making projects?
Wow, I learned quite a few things, but I would say certainly one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable, was trust your actors. As a director, let your actors get into the character and bring things in that aren't in the script and that you didn't think of, but they will because they're getting into this character and they're starting to think like this character. Probably the very earliest example of that was when we were doing wardrobe for Jackson Rathbone, who played Brad, our bad guy. And originally we had him kind of, scrubby looking character, not scrubby looking, but just, not a neat freak. Well, Jackson had the idea of being a button down psychopath. So as we're looking at shirts and slacks and stuff like that, he says, no. He says, I want to do it this way. And it worked out beautifully, where he became this neat freak. And that's why the rug always had to be raked. Of course, it was also a security thing, but everything always had to be kept neat and clean. If you remember, that's one of the lines in the movie from Megan, Carrie Metters. Everything must always be neat and clean because he had this clean fetish. And that was something that he came up with. Also, if you remember the scene where early on, before the Halloween party, on Halloween night, Chelsea and Christina, her sister, who's in the Jessie the cowgirl outfit, and her mother are in the kitchen. And as her mother has to work a night shift as a nurse, she leaves and she walks by Christina in the cowgirl outfit and pats her on the shoulder and says, "Giddy up." Well, that wasn't in the script, but it was so choice. I said, that's staying in. I love that. That's a couple of little things, but over and again, as new directors, one of the things I did learn out of reading the many books, especially the one called Directing Actors, was put some faith in your actors, let them get some buy-in into the story by being part of the creative process. They're not just robots where you say this line and say it this way and so on. Don't demonstrate for them how to say it. Tell them the kind of feeling that you want them to bring out, you know. So it's always tempting to say, well, I want you to emphasize this word. No, don't do that unless it's absolutely essential to the storyline. And the whole thing is you're telling a story. You know, it's all about the story. And so the better you can tell the story with all the other technical stuff going on, if you don't have a good story and you don't tell it well, it's going to fall on its face.
So how has COVID-19 impacted Iron Compass, and what changes do you think there will be in the industry post-pandemic?
Well, because right now we're back in the writing stage, it really hasn't affected us. You know, we were in post-production on Do Not Reply. We wrote another script called Surprise Party, and that's a political satire. So you have the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, and now you're going to have the Surprise Party. So there's going to be a third party, and you know, the candidate was going to be the least likely person to ever be elected president of the United States, and so it's a comedy, you know, satire. And that was all in the writing stage. So we weren't actually on set producing anything where we had a lot of close contact with people. And we won't be there for a while yet. We're actually working on a third script now. We kind of set that one aside just because the timing, if we could have gotten that film out earlier this year, when things were still, you know, a pretty good distance from the election, it might have been, you know, a better time. But now the election's already here. It's going to be over with before we could even start shooting. So the whole political climate's going to change, and it may or may not be a good film in 4 years, you know, so we'll wait and see. So we're now working on a third one called Visions, which is a book written by my oldest daughter, Tanya, who's written several young adult books. And Visions is about a young girl, high school girl, who has these visions. Her husband, not her husband, her father is a policeman, and she ends up with her visions helping to solve crimes and things like that. And it's set in Durango, Colorado, because we used to have a place there, and my daughter Tanya fell in love with Durango. And the male love interest of the young lady who's the star is a Ute Indian, and there's a culture clash between the Indian culture and the white culture, and he's sort of prejudiced against the white folks. He just doesn't want anything to do with white folks, but then it turns out he gets attracted to her and she's attracted to him and all that. So it's really a love story, but it's also about her ability to have these visions. So we're in the process of converting that into either a feature film or a miniseries and see where it goes from there. So COVID hasn't really been an effect on us. It had any significant effect on us.
All right. So this is something that I feel like everyone here is probably really interested to hear about. What are some skills that you would want to see in young filmmakers? What do you think we as students should be doing right now to kind of gear up for a career in the industry?
Well, coming at it the way I did, I would say learn as much as you can about every phase of filmmaking, if filmmaking is what you're going to do. There's so much that goes on besides the screenplay and the directing and the cinematography. Those are all important, of course. The set design, how do you make the set look and feel the way it needs to look and feel for the story that you're telling? You know, you see we had these pastel colors here, which is kind of counter to the whole idea of a horror story, right? It's usually dark and dingy and so on. And yet, this is the real world out there. You know, there are things going on in places that are, quote, relatively normal, that are horrible. And so this is kind of, again, we designed this to be a cautionary tale to say, don't think that this only happens in the typical movie horror scene environment. It doesn't. It can happen right next door to you. And that's why this final scene, when they come out of the house, you're in a regular neighborhood, a regular suburban neighborhood, to make that point that this is happening. And you may remember the guy, I think his name was Castro, up in Toledo, Ohio, that had several girls trapped in his house for years. and his neighbors never knew it. So, I mean, that was one of the things that made us think of doing this in this particular way. It can happen right under your nose and you'd never know it. I mean, from that, the colorizing, the sound, the music, our musical composer, Ben Lovett, was actually out of Asheville, North Carolina. And we went and visited him, Daniel and I, from Auburn. Daniel had come out here. And just sitting down with him and seeing what he had done in other films and talking with him. And we had the film pretty well edited before he started writing the music. And he said, you know, I really prefer to be involved way up front, you know, even before you've edited. I think it worked out fine. I think he did a great job on the music. But, you know, we shot nearly 2,000 minutes of raw video. We used over 300 cards, and each card is what, 6 or 7 gigabytes? Yeah, gigabytes. I mean, there's a lot of raw footage that we edited down to 97 minutes. So you're throwing away about 95% of everything that you spent so much time and money to shoot in order to get down to the best 5% or so. So I would learn as much as you can about all the different areas. And then, you know, if you have a specialty that you really feel is where you want to go, whether it's writing, directing, producing, you know, then home in on that. But to me, I've always been a generalist. I like to see the big picture. I like to see how the pieces fit together. And I think that's a valuable thing, is to appreciate where each of the other people are coming from. My set designer going crazy because she felt like she didn't have enough money to build the set. And partly that's because we spent $6,000 on that carpet so that we could see footprints that wasn't in the original budget. And I told her, I said, just tell me what you need, you know, we'll get you some more money. Tell me what you need. Well, no, I got a budget. She's so used to working within that budget. And recognizing the personalities of the people that you're working with and how you can best work within their personality, because you're not going to change them. They are who they are, and you are who you are. But if you're directing, managing, producing, you've got to make that work. And so every person has their own reward structure. Some just want some recognition. Some need a lot of recognition. Some just say, hey, tell me what you want and turn me loose and don't bug me, and I'll get the job done. So the people management side of it is a very big aspect too. So learn that. Learn how to work with people as a team, because it's very much a team effort.
Awesome. So let's open up the floor for any other questions. I think me and Mary are done with the ones that we had prepared. So if you just raise your hand, I'll call on you individually so we're not all talking at once. So, okay, Chris.
Can't hear you, Chris.
Oh,
Now
can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to know, do you have any advice for any aspiring screenwriters?
Do a lot of writing, accept criticism because you're going to get it. Do a lot of reading, you know, get the Save the Cat series, get the, I'm looking at my shelf here, the Screenwriter's Bible is another good book. I would say also think about when you're writing a screenplay, of course, you're writing action lines and you're writing dialogue, right? In the action lines, take a look at a book called Shot by Shot, which is how you're going to actually shoot it, because that can change how you write your action lines. Think about what this is really going to look like on the screen. And one of the things I had to get hammered into my head by my patient son was, this is a visual medium. You don't have to tell everything like you do in a novel. You don't have to describe everything. And even if you do, the set's probably not going to look exactly like you describe it in an action line. So put what's essential in the action lines. Keep your dialogue crisp and punchy. Keep it moving. It's important to keep it moving. One of the criticisms from one of our critics on Do Not Reply was that it moved too slowly. Well, I mean, that was one person. We know no one else ever said that, but but it is important to keep it moving so that people stay engaged. I would just say, you know, practice writing, do it over and over again. Get people to critique, people who will give you an honest critique, and learn from the critiques. We took a lot of criticism in all the scripts that we've written. And sometimes you say, well, why did they say that? And then you stop and think about it a little bit. And okay, you know, we know what we were thinking when we wrote that, but it didn't come through the way we wrote it. So maybe we need to write it in a little different way. But practice, practice, practice. and have a very thick skin, because it's hard. It's really hard to write a good screenplay. You know, I'm sure you've studied it and you know about the timing elements. You got to have that inciting incident by page 10 or 12 or 15 at the very latest or so. And, you know, you got your midpoint, and some people say start at the middle and write out, you know, towards both ends. It's an individual thing, I think, but just a lot of practice, you know, and read a lot of screenplays, you know, get a hold of screenplays that are well done. You can buy screenplays from various places for movies that you really liked, and read them. And, you know, you'll see that they're not all done in exactly the same style. There's some where action lines are very, very short and they're punchy, and others where they'll group them into, you know, a paragraph that's 6 or 7 lines long, which is, I wouldn't go much more than that. But the punchier it is, and the way it visually looks, I think the better it comes across. So I'd keep your action lines like 3 lines, 4 lines maybe, or less, and use more of them. Just my own personal opinion. That's just one opinion. So.
Blaze?
What kind of advice would you have about being able to network just starting out in the industry? How do you think we should go about that?
Well, I know what Daniel has done. Daniel's paid a lot of dues as a PA. You know, you don't get paid much, but he got to rub elbows with Tom Cruise and Steven Spielberg and Vin Diesel and people like that. You know, you're going to have to pay a lot of dues in this industry unless you get extremely lucky. And that just happens so rarely. It's like winning the lottery. You know, it is not an easy industry to break into. Even now, you know, as we've built relationships through creating this film and meeting more and more people, going out to film festivals where you meet a lot of people, we're still not able to get serious interest in producing the Bessie Coleman story. And it is a fantastic story. Her life story, I swear it's Oscar material if it's done as a feature, or it's Emmy material if it's done as a miniseries. And it probably, there's enough material there, we could probably make it a miniseries just as easily. But, you know, I have given the pitch book, you know, we call this our pitch book. And it's 54 pages. I mean, it's just loaded with comparables, with artwork, with history, you know, sample posters, potential actors for the different roles. I mean, we put together one heck of a nice pitch book. I gave one of these to Tim Cook, and I gave one of these to Octavia Spencer. Nothing. Nothing came out. I did get a call from someone at Apple who's she's in charge of media acquisitions or something, and she said, you know, it's just not for us. Well, good golly, you got the help. You got 12 Years a Slave, Hidden Figures, several more that I'm blanking on right now, but you've got some films that have been so successful because they're true stories about people in Black history. And this goes back to a time when it was really, really tough, you know, again, the Jim Crow area, to be successful as a Black person. And this is a Black female doing something that even Black males would have been told, you can't do that. Well, they told her she couldn't do it, and she proved them wrong. She did it. And she did it extremely well. So, I mean, it's a fantastic story. We're going to get it done one way or the other, one of these days. You know, I just have to make the right connection. But it takes a tremendous amount of persistence. There's a saying by Calvin Coolidge on persistence. Google it, because it's really good. Truthfully, look it up. It's a short saying. It's about a page. But he talks about education and, various other things, the things that it takes to be successful. And he says, when it's all said and done, persistence is the thing that wins out. So it's not necessarily genius. It's not necessarily talent or education. I mean, education is important. I'm not putting it down. Obviously, I believe in it with 3 degrees. But persistence, just don't give up. And it's hard sometimes. We almost gave up on our Words Plus company, the one that did the computers for the disabled. After about 3 or 4 years, we were just barely getting the bills paid. I mean, maxed out credit cards and all that. It was a real struggle. And I almost went back in the aerospace industry, and boy, it was like just in the nick of time, another check would come in from someone we didn't even know they were going to place an order, but they heard about us and they had a family member with ALS. And okay, we're doing something good here. We need to stick with this. We felt like we were on a mission. And so persistence paid off. I ended up being in that business for 30 years and then finally selling it. But if without that, I wouldn't be here today. Any other questions?
Oh, Jason?
I don't hear Jason.
Hello? Okay. My question is, what is your favorite moment working in the film industry and some of your favorite people that you've worked with?
Oh, wow. I would say the vast majority of our crew and cast that we worked with in Do Not Reply was great. When we went to the Orlando Film Festival and they put up the nominations, and we were nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Cinematographer, and Best Director, which was Daniel and me being first-time directors. And we were up against Jojo Rabbit, by the way. If Jojo Rabbit had not been in that festival, we would have won all of those. But you're competing with a $30 million production with some pretty heavy hitters. But we did quite well. In fact, we took Best Poster and Best Trailer out of that, even beating out Jojo Rabbit on those 2. So that was quite a thrill to see our names up there, as they brought up each category, and wow, we're there again, and now we're there again, and now we're there again. And we've been Best Picture nominees at several other film festivals. We've had Best Actor that we've actually won at several. Best Screenplay at one. These are all relatively small horror film festivals. They're not as big as Orlando, but the Orlando one was a big one, and to be nominated for awards like that was just, it was an affirmation that we did something really pretty good. It wasn't so bad, in spite of some of the really tough critics. And I swear the best movies have some critics that are just going to tear them apart just because they think that's their job.
All right, one more question. Sarah, did you have a question? All right.
My question was, did you have any advice for becoming a director for those looking to start a career in directing?
Well, I know that I never would have been a director if I wasn't also the executive producer and paying the bills. So this was a way for me, knowing I was going to retire later that year, to take a plunge. I put in a lot of money in this movie. It cost us a little over $1 million, and so it wasn't a cheap movie by my standards. It was a cheap movie on the grand scale of things, but not by my own personal standards. So I can't tell you what it takes to become a director in the quote real world, because my world is one that I sort of created by being willing to spend the money. I know that many times whoever writes the screenplay gets to be the director. And so if you can write a good story in a screenplay format, I'd say that's probably a way to get your way into being a director. The director's job is to tell the story, right? It's not to call all the shots necessarily. Your cinematographer will call a lot of the shots. In fact, you're going to take so many shots from so many different angles that the editor is going to decide, and you'll work with the editor. But I'd say one of the lessons I learned was, don't try to think about, I want this scene to be shot this way. Instead, take all the shots that your cinematographer feels are appropriate, if you've got a good cinematographer, and that's obviously important. But learning about the various shots that you can make and the tricks, and avoiding, simple stuff that you learn on day one. You avoid jump cuts and things like that. But you also learn, what was the thing I learned about the left and right perspective? There was something going on in one of the shots, and it took me about 3 questions repeated before it's like, ding, and now I know what you're talking about. And I can't remember now exactly what it was. There was something that when you went from one shot looking in one direction to the other shot, if you didn't do that exactly, the crossover. Yeah, avoid the crossover. That's what it was. So you wouldn't want to shoot this way and then shoot this way. You might want to go this way and this way, but you didn't want to do a crossover. And that took me a little bit to, I may be describing it not perfectly, but that was something I had to learn. But I would say, if you want to be a good director, in my very limited experience now, I'm no expert at this, I'd say, write something really good. And if you can get someone to produce it, you got a good chance that they might let you direct it as well. And it'll be small to start with. Do the small stuff, do the shorts, get your experience, go to the film festivals, bring your shorts in there and show them. That's one thing I learned. I go to these film festivals, and to see how many short projects have been done and how well some of them have been done was really enlightening. I thought, why would anybody make a short? You don't make any money, Well, no, you don't. You put money into it, but you get the experience and you get the exposure and you meet people, and it's how you start the networking. The networking question earlier, I should have thought of that answer for that. Making shorts, getting together with your friends or whoever who want to put together a project, scrape up some money from somewhere. Maybe you get your parents to be benefactors or somebody like that, or you just all kick in something from your day jobs if you have day jobs. And just do the shorts and get some experience doing that. Go to the festivals, see what other people are doing. You can learn a lot from how other people have done things.
All right. Well, this has been so amazing. I want to thank everybody for coming, and thank you, Mr. Woltosz, for coming to speak to us. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. It was really insightful, and so cool to know that somebody from Auburn is out there making movies. And that's just, I don't know, I really enjoyed this talk. So,
well, I had a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. And good luck to you all. If you need anything, Mary's got my email, feel free. You can contact me. And if I can give you any advice or any help, just let me know.
Yes, for sure. We will keep you updated on the film festival in the spring as well.
Great. Look forward to it. Thank you so much, everybody. War Eagle.
War Eagle.
Thank you, War Eagle.
Bye-bye.